It's a great pleasure for me to introduce Dr. Wiejie Song, who has received a PhD in comparative literature from Beijing University in China, and his PhD also in East Asian Studies from Columbia University. He is an associate professor of Chinese and comparative literature at Rutgers University in the United States. His research interests include modern Chinese literature and film, urban and environmental humanities, martial arts and popular culture, as well as Sinophone and diaspora studies. He is the author of various books, such as Mapping Modern Beijing, Space, Emotion, Literary Topography, and the author in Chinese, From Entertainment Activity to Utopian Impulse, reading Jin Zhong's martial arts fiction, and also China literature and the United States, images of China in America and Chinese American novel and drama. He's currently working on projects of environmental objects and Chinese eco-criticism. He is the editor of selected works of Xu Dishang, and he's the co-editor of Northeast China Studies, Environmental Humanities, Eco-Criticism, Nature Writing. Also the Northeast China Reader and Chinese translator and co-translator of Repressed Modernities, Translingual Practice, Comparative Poetics, the Structural Transformation of Public Sphere, Understanding Popular Culture, and After the Great Divide, Modernism, Mass Culture, and Postmodernism. Thank you very much. Today is going to be talking about topography, trees. We cannot see the slide right now.
Can you see it right now?
No, we cannot see the PowerPoint. We just lost it.
Oh, okay. How about now?
No.
Okay.
I think you maybe it's hidden, one of the because we kind of saw it. Let's see.
Hold on a second.
Yeah, now exactly. Now we can see it.
Okay,
yes.
now I can see it. Okay.
Yes, perfect. So
can you see the full screen? You know the.
Yes, perfect,
okay.
Perfect. Full screen now.
Okay, good.
As I was saying, his lecture today is about trees and eco-criticism. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Can you see right now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, okay, let me start. Hello, fellows. It is my great honor and pleasure to deliver this lecture for the wonderful topic, exploring eco-narrations and narratives of hope. It's great. And sustainable relations and also the dialogues in the post-COVID-19 global pandemic. I'm deeply grateful to Professor Gianna Sotelo for this wonderful opportunity. And you can see this is the title of my lecture, Trees, Forests, Phytography, and Eco-Criticism. Can I see the second slide?
Yes.
Okay. So if you are familiar with the 17 goals proposed by the United Nations, you can see that I'm going to focus on here the main topic, number 15. So that is the Sustainable Development Goals Life Online, which seeks to protect, restore, and promote sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystems, sustainably manage forests, combat desertification, and halt and reverse land degradation, and halt biodiversity loss. I'm also going to focus on this goal 11, you can see here, sustainable cities and communities, which aims to make cities and human settlements inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. And then you can see that United Nations proposes these 17 goals and provide a shared blueprint for peace and prosperity for people and the planet now and also into the future. So a few words about this new term, phytography. So I understand trees and forests as environmental object and phytography or plant writing as critical approaches to environmental humanities, eco-criticism, and the narratives of hope. So first, allow me to say a few words about this new term. It's kind of a jargon, phytography, a term indicating plant writing in the larger context of environmental humanities. So phytography refers to the entanglement of the human and the plants, including the trees and the forests, and of the human agency and the plant independency. It includes human writings about human plant lives, as well as plant life per se. So plant, trees, forests can be the protagonist of the narrative. So with a focus on photography, we can examine vegetal intelligence, human behaviors, time-space continuum, and the corporeal contacts between the human and the plants in multi-layered narratives and transmedia imaginations. So photography investigates and reveals the complex worlds of plants and trees and brings to the limelight the changing and forming human-flora relationship. So I attempt to connect trees and forests with a few other significant environmental objects, such as waters, air and smog, plastics, and smokestacks. So I shall give you the example. Can you see now the air narrative? Okay, so number one, you can see, we can go back to this one. It's too quick. Hold on a second. Can you see this slide? This is the water story, the biography of waters. Okay, great. Thank you very much. So we can explore the biographies of waters in terms of a few particular perspectives. The scarcity of water and the search for life resources, and also water pollution and water purification. And then we can move on to the next one, the ideological, ecological, and hygienic narratives about waters, and also water writing, Anthropocene, and de-Anthropocene. And here, this is the films and also literary narratives. So now we can move on to the air stories, stories about air, fog, smoke, and smog as the environmental objects. So sure, we can revisit the past like Xiaojue did. So think about Oriental aesthetics regarding airs, fogs as a beauty object. And also we can focus on the literary writing, visual presentation, and avant-garde art regarding this theme. And then the grassroots movement, the practice of daily life, like playing taiji over there in the smog day. And also we can see some very important term, right, focus on the collective ecological unconscious, biophilic, and aesthetic impulse. Let's continue this topic. So for air, fog, smoke, and smog as environmental objects, we can also, you can see that's the connection to geographical distribution, public health concern, ecological crisis and propaganda, mainstream scientific discourse, official and personal concerns and warnings, New Deal on traffic laws, where to travel in the cities and other part of the world, and also modification of economic development model. So money talks everywhere, but money is not everything, right? We need to care about the environmental issues here. This is the air story. We can also move on to the story of plastics, here, hold on a second. So for the trajectories of plastics in the cities and the countryside, we can also study the scale and the dissemination of plastics, the exploitation of colonialism and the global capitalism, and the doomsday of human civilization and the ecosystem, as well as the mortality or finitude of life. So this you can see, this is plastic bags flying in the sky. You can see that's the one sign of the pollution in the contemporary days. So we can also consider industrial smokestacks as the environmental object, which focuses on, at least here we can see 5 major themes. Number one, the smokestacks as the incarnation of modernization and industrial civilization, and also the crystallization of modernity anxiety, and also the gigantic signs and the landmarks of post-war industrialization and urban development, the targets for the belated awakening of environmental and eco-critical awareness, and also the materialization of industrial and post-industrial sentiments like memory and nostalgia. So you can see here, I understand the imagery of smokestacks both as a concrete object and an abstract concept, which emerged in works ranging from early Chinese futurist eulogy to modernist elegy, from Maoist propaganda to post-socialist eco-critical reflections, and even post-fifth generation requiem for communism, and from literary imagination to artistic representation as well. And now this is today's topic. So also try to situate trees, forests, and phytography into the context of eco-criticism, environmental humanities, the material turn, the affective turn, and also here you can see the entanglement of ideology and ecology. So let me explain here. Number one, I put three terms together. So that is environmental humanities, eco-criticism, and nature writing. So we can see here. So environmental humanities, eco-criticism, and human writings include, number one, environmental philosophy or ecosophy and environmental ethics in the 1970s. This is a starting point. And also the environmental history in the 1980s. And the third, environmental literature, cultural studies, anthropology, geography, and political ecology since the 1980s. We can also focus on the three waves of environmental humanities here, 1, 2, 3. And we can see the shift of focuses and also scopes of investigation from wave 1, focusing on the nature and the non-human world, for example, the trees, forests, and more, right, the waters and others. Then to the second wave, the urban life and environmental justice or injustice. And then to the third wave, the transnational and multi-ethnic ecological crisis and sustainable futures. Also use Shayana's term here, you can see that's the narrative of hopes. And then we can also, you can see, focusing on one particular term coined by Professor Karen Sonberg, that is called eco-ambiguity. There are different types of ambiguities in terms of eco-criticism, right? Here, that's the definition. The complex, contradictory interactions between people and the environment with a significant non-human presence here. And one by one, I mentioned that some major critical sources. So these are also my source of inspiration. Number one, the material turn. So the issues and methods of material turns, I can borrow Bill Brown's book here, A Sense of Things, the object matter of American literature and more here. So I focus on the social life and the biography of material things and objects, try to locate the trajectories of objects, human identity, and to tease out the entanglements of objectivity and subjectivity. In other words, I understand trees and forests both as objects, concrete, and also abstract concept. Then we can move on to the affective turn regarding feelings, emotions, and affects. So the affective turn, which is evidenced in Gail Deleuze and Felix Guattari's book, A Thousand Plateaus, and also the English translation by Brian Matsumi. And here is a note from Matsumi. And also here, as another scholar, make it a very, this is Eric Schulz with a very brief elucidation. So here we can see feelings are personal and biographical, emotions are social, and affects are pre-personal. And then we can move on back to the very classical definition of ideology, and then the new one, the ecology here. So we can see two figures, Louis Althusser and also Terry Eagleton. So let me quote. So the understanding of ideology, and the next slide would be Raymond Williams' structural feeling here. This is my understanding. So the ideology and also the structural feeling, we can understand them as the nexus of materiality, reality, and mentality. That is to say, to borrow Louis Althusser's classical definition of ideology, so ideology reveals both a real and an imaginary relationship, which express a will, could be conservative, conformist, could be also reformist, revolutionary, even radical, a hope or a nostalgia, rather than describing a reality here. And in this regard, we can move on to the term structural feeling. So his description of structural feeling is also inspiring and illuminating. So this is from Raymond Williams. Structural feeling is firm and definite as structure suggests, yet it operates in the most delicate and the least tangible parts of our activity. It displays a set of collective sentiments in process that has not yet been formalized in fixed ideology or values. So we're talking about characteristic elements of impulse, restraint, and tone, specifically affective elements of consciousness and relationships, not feeling against thought, but thought as felt and feeling as thought, practical consciousness of a present kind in a living and interrelating continuity. And then this is my case studies. You can see a bunch of books. So I choose to focus on the storytelling of trees and forests, deforestation and afforestation, the rise of environmental consciousness and eco-critical concern about ecological crises, and also the complexity of human-nature relationship evidenced in a wide variety of literary, cinematic, and artistic works, and also their photographic approaches. I limited my scope of investigation within 40 years, roughly from the 1980s to 2020s. In modern Chinese literary and artistic works, trees are everywhere, appearing in multi-genre, including poems, essays, novellas and novels, non-fictional reportage, documentary, and feature films. And from this right part, you can see, so I'm going to talk about the trees, forests, and photography in contemporary Chinese literary and multimedia representations along the range of 4 dimensions. Number 1, trees, forests as the tokens of marred humanity. Number 2, the sign of eco-critical awakening. And number 3, the indicator of climate crisis. And number 4, the illustration of biophilia, biophobia in entanglement, loving the nature or hating, the nature with fears and other anxieties and more. So that's the 4 major dimensions I'm going to focus. So that's the first case. Can you see right now? The burning of the forest?
Yes, we can see it. Yeah.
Oh, great, beautiful. Okay. So we can revisit here the major literature trend in China starting from 1980s. We call it Chinese educated youth literature. So that's just some information. So educated youth literature refers to the millions of urban junior high and high school students who were sent down to the countryside to settle as farmers and peasants during the Cultural Revolution from 1966 to 1976. Following their return to the cities in the wake of the Cultural Revolution, these educated youth writers have been focusing on their village experiences, adventures and discoveries, literary conventions in the past, and also ethnic minorities related to their sent-down geographical locations. Educated youth literature also carries over scar literature, you can see here, and reform literature, search for the roots literature in the 1980s, and later enters into the new stages of neo-realism with different variants after the 1990s. And the author here you can see is Kong Jiesheng. So in the year 1984, so Kong Jiesheng published a groundbreaking novella called Forest Primeval, which focuses on the 5 educated youths, 5 people, 5 protagonists, who are sent down to a virgin forest in the south, in the tropical area, to explore the sites so that one company from the farm can open up the forest to grow rubber. Rubber trees would be more useful at that time. So regarding the writing of the Forest Primeval, the author Kong Jiesheng once confessed that when I walked along in the forest, I easily became confused and disoriented. It is unnecessary to burn the forest to make room for the rubber trees. And in this novella, when the 5 educated youths get lost in the forest, 4 of them decided to return to the farm, giving up their task of conquering the nature, But one of the four protagonists have realized here, they say, the task is worthless and they will eventually bring disasters to the environment. But the fifth one, the last one, he insists on marching forward, and he regards this dangerous task as a chance for him to become a new hero, and feels that he achieved greatness that no one has achieved before. But later, this one, the fifth one, is trapped in the labyrinths of the forest and loses his life. So that's just the beginning. And then we can move on this masterpiece, a novella called The King of Trees. So Ah Cheng's novella, The King of Trees, was published in 1985. 1 year later, it is a masterpiece. So we can focus on a few paragraphs in details of the stories to have a better view of trees, forests, phytography, biophilia, and also the awakening environmental and eco-critical consciousness in the post-Mao Chinese literature in terms of four perspectives, you can see here. Useless and useful trees. How to define this kind of useless and useful, at that time and after. A tree spirit, superstition, concept, ideology. And then we can move on to the tree cutting scene. We can see the detailed stories about the silence, witness, epiphany, and awakening. And that one, at the end of the story, we can see the double silence, double death, and also a kind of hopeful rebirth from the story. So we can see here there are continuous dialogues between the educated youth from the city and then one protagonist. His name is Naughty. Know this one. So he's from the city. She is as well. But Naughty, we cannot find the particular protagonist image. But then think of a very strong man, like a true, the tree king over there. So his name is Naughty. Like this kind of side shape of the tree. So Naughty is from the countryside, but he would reply to the calls from in these urban kids. So he would say the Naughty. So that king of tree, like this, there's only one big tree. We call it, the king of trees here. So that king of tree has become a spirit. Anyone who fails it will be in trouble. And this king of trees has to be spared. It cannot be cut down. Even if the rest of them fall, this one will stand as a witness. And then the urban kids would ask the question, so witness to what? And the Naughty replied, witness to the work of the supreme God in heaven, still the nature here. And then the educated youth from the cities laughs at the belief of tree spirit. So Li Li, for example, he talks about eliminating superstition by chopping down the king of trees, and proposes that once we chop down the king of tree and it falls, a concept will be destroyed. So people's ideology should be totally renewed and cleansed with this new ideology here. Man will triumph over heaven. So this dialogue. So in an appealing way, the tree cutting scene showcases a double silence. So finally, the tree, the great tree or the king of tree, hit the ground, sprung back up instantly, touched down again, bounced twice more, then rolled over in the dark, finally coming to a rest. The whole world turned silent, and the educated youth was stunned, unable to speak. Here, again, think about the cutting tree scene. In the end of the novella, Ah Cheng describes the double death of the great tree and also the countryman whose name is Naughty, with a hopeful rebirth as follows. You can see the signs of hopes. So Naughty's remains were buried in the original grave site. As time went by, a patch of grass with white flowers grew over it. People who understood these things told us that the plant was a kind of medicinal herb, especially effective in healing wounds. As we continue our work on the mountain, we often stopped and gazed across the landscape. We could see the huge trunk, scarred like a man who had fallen, and we could also see the patch of white flowers like bones exposed in dismembered limbs. So the double silence, the double death, and also the possible rebirth, more or less, brings to the limelight the following questions. Is the king of tree a tree or a human, or both a tree and a human, evidenced in the incarnation of human nature entanglement, or in a type of mutual embodiment so much so to push us to reconsider the human-centered perspective and to represent that no one, not man, trees, tree king or king tree, can be separated with an emphasis on the evolving relationship in the human-plant writing and also the weakening ecological and environmental consciousness. And then we can move on to two new work here in the genealogy of reportage literature. So I've only briefly mentioned Xu Gang's bold and brief reportage is called Loggers Wake Up, published in 1988, and also his recent environmental reflection entitled The Great Forest, published in 2017. And along the same genre and the genealogy of reportage literature, we can also consider Wang Zhi'an's apocalyptic The Tragic Forest, published in 1999. And then, thanks to their unfailing and continuous efforts and calls, we can see a major change has already happened with trees and forests in China. According to Carbon Brief, China planted the largest amount of new forest out of any country between 1990 and 2015, facilitated by the country's Green for Green program, started in the year 1999 by investing more than $100 billion in the reforestation program and planting more than 35 billion trees across 20 provinces. That's a major achievement. And then by the year 2015, the amount of planted forests in China covered 79 million hectares. And then we can move on to another story here. This is a award-winning novel published in 2005. This is a significant example. It is Zhi Zijian, a female writer's lyrical and nomadic photography ethnobotany novel entitled The Last Quarter of the Moon here. The book summary is as follows. In this sweeping epic of 100 years of love and loss, maybe think about 100 years of solitude by Marquez here, a woman tells her family saga from the perspective of one of the last remote reindeer herding tribes who live in the mountain forest of northeast China. So at the end of the 20th century, an old woman sits among the birch trees and thinks back over her life, her loves, and the joys and the tragedies that have befallen her family and her people. She is a member of a local minority Wiejie tribe who wander the remote woodlands with their herds of reindeer, living in close sympathy with nature as its most beautiful and cruel. An idyllic childhood playing by the river ends with her father's death and also the growing realization that her mother's and uncle's relationship is not as simple as she thought. They are shamans. They have magical powers. Then in the 1930s, the intimate and secluded world of the tribe is shattered when the Japanese army invaded China, and then Wiejie cannot avoid being pulled into the brutal conflict with the 100 years of transitions governed by ritual, the laws of nature, and also the wills of the spirits. So in the beginning of this lecture, I briefly mentioned that the three waves of environmental humanities. So this covers both the first and the third waves. So Zhi Zijian's The Last Quarter of the Moon not only creates a dazzling epic about an extraordinary woman bearing witness to the stories of her tribe and also the transformation of China, but also displays the nature and the non-human world in the first wave, as well as the transnational and multi-ethnic ecological crises and sustainable futures in the third wave of environmental humanities. Now let's turn on to the second wave here. We can move from the wilderness, the nature, to the cities. Now this is the case, the story of Beijing. So the second wave, the urban life and the environmental justice, with a salient example that is Franz Kafka Prize winner Yan Lianke's Beijing story entitled Garden Number 711, The Ultimate Last Memo of Beijing, published in 2012. In this work, we can witness trees, flowers, dream, ecophilia, or an ecotopia, and its deconstruction in the suburban area of contemporary Beijing. The story is colored by Yan Lianke's particular term you can see here, mythorealism. A term is kind of combination of myth and realism. This is coined a new term, as explained. This is his definition. So mythorealism abandons the seemingly logical relationships of real life and explores a non-existent truth, an invisible truth, and a truth concealed by truth. Mythorealism keeps a distance from any prevailing realism. The mythorealist connection with reality does not lie in straightforward cause and effect links, but rather relies on human souls, minds, and also the author's extraordinary fabrications based on reality. So that's why here we can see in this kind of mythorealism, stories of trees, flowers, cities, and more, right? We can see that imaginations, metaphors, myths, legends, dreams, fantasy, demonization, and transplantation born from everyday life and social reality can all serve as mythorealist methods and channels. So Yan Lianke declares that this story, Garden Number 711, is a tribute to Henry David Thoreau's masterpiece, Walden, or Lives in the Woods. So as a countryman living in a city, so Yan Lianke expresses his fondness and familiarity with the nature. Walden is Yan Lianke's dream book, and Yan planned to write a similar book proposing the nature is the part of human life, and human beings are part of the nature, and also an ecological text in which only nature exists and no human are present. In this sense, the trees, flowers, and the nature would be the main protagonist. In Garden Number 711, Yan Lianke connects the objects to wildflowers, vegetables, plants, foodstuffs, and their magical and mythical prehistory and present story. Furthermore, he also describes the flowers and trees inside and outside of his courtyard and creates a mytho-reality in the botanic world. We can see that's the details. Plants in position of virtues, emotions, love, animosity, and even private hobbies. Yan also portrays the happiness and sadness of insects, birds, and animals, and he welcomes wandering homeless cats and dogs as new residents of his garden. In his warm and touching history of an ecological utopia, he uses first-person narration to depict the tracks, traces, actions, and feelings of all kinds of non-human beings. Man and nature exist in peace, balance, and harmony. But we can see that's Beijing contemporary time. So predictably, this utopia could not last long. The ecological utopia of Garden Number 711 ended abruptly in the winter of the year 2011, when the administrative authorities of the municipal and the national governments decided to demolish the garden for the sake of a road building project. And then in the end of this story, we can see the chapters. This chapter title, Fragmentary Records of the Garden. This chapter uses striking visual imagery and finds powerful analogy that resonate. We can see the story of the plant trees, their stories. Cypress sticks hit the ground with furious sound and energetic resistance. The uncertain fate of peach trees indicates the future of the garden. The first-person eye bids a tearful farewell to the 4 thorn trees. The garden and its plants claim victory over steel saws. Ivies climb everywhere over the walls, demonstrating their vitality and adaptability. And finally, the physical shape and size of the garden become the methods of disclosing the author's anxiety, indignation, philosophical reflection, and the literary representation of the dilemma of developmentalism here on the one hand, and also environmental injustice on the other. So garden number 711 exhibits an ephemeral and also macro-level ecotopia, where natural order might be temporarily re-established, but it nevertheless destined to be deformed and destroyed according to the blueprint of China and Beijing's crazy into insane economic development. And here from the story, you can see a strategy of resistance. This kind of resistance strategy and the dreaming ending makes garden number 711 provides a hopeful future for the author to rearrange the sequence of flowers, trees, birds, fish, and insects, and also reconstruct the spatial order of the garden and the courtyard, and also reorient the connection between the man and nature. So this bygone ecotopia by Yan Ke may well be connected with the later works in the year 2020. We can see two works here, all published in that year, and two major authors. So Hu Donglin, he passed away in the year 2017. So his posthumous encyclopedia eco-writing notebooks from the mountains and the forest describes the wildlife in Changbaishan Mountain, their district in northeast China. And Chen Yingsong on the left, his eco-critical milestone, Forest is Silent, so offers the most recent and striking examples of phytography and also the deep concerns for ecological and environmental protection and justice in the Shendongjia Forest, the wildlife protection district in the northwest of Hubei province. Both Hu Donglin and Chen Yingsong have 20+ years work and living experience in the forest. I will briefly focus on Chen Yingsong, who has been widely regarded as one of the best forest writers in contemporary China, and wrap up today's lecture. So Chen Yingsong is hailed as the king of forest writing. For him, trees can serve as a local climate wind indicator. They present small natural features, chances of nestlings, and also promising livelihood. Trees and forests can also trigger healthy nostalgia and cultivate eco-critical consciousness. Trees and forests are dear friends and family members. They can provide cure and remedy for mental sufferings and psychological depression. So in the story, The Forest is Silent, Chen Yingsong claims a forest position, a forest attitude, forest manifesto, and develops grand forest narrative. He covers dozens of species of trees, flowers, and animals. He also describes and encounters between the forest and the machines. For example, the electronic saws, axes, the project of airport, and also the other kind of digging machines, so on and so forth, to criticize the greedy human development, the problematic blueprint of modernization and globalization. His powerful storytelling is located at the nexus of shaman, superstition, reason, the savage mind, the human-plant-animal relationship evidenced in the protagonist's biophilia romance. Trees, forests, and photography addresses not only about species, categories, and the categorization, but also comes to terms with the emotional attachment to environmental objects. So trees are also close connected with roots and uproots, the representation of physical and psychological distance, and the forgotten yet promising livelihood, among many others. So to sum it up, by exploring the storytelling of deforestation and afforestation, the rise of ecological and ethical consciousness, and the complexity of human-nature relationship, I aim to examine trees as environmental object, and thus to investigate contemporary Chinese multimedia photography along the ranges of token of marred humanity, sign of eco-critical awakening, indicator of climate crisis, and illustration of biophilia, biophobia, entanglement. The distinctive tree stories, forest narratives, photography, and eco-writing or eco-narration provide an illuminating entry point into the changing material trajectories and social life, the awakening of environmental consciousness, the structural transformation of private feelings and public emotions against the great backdrop of industrial, de-industrial, and post-industrial times and related ecological impacts. And this is the last slide. I also prepared a list of articles, and also you can see chapters and the books, including primary text translations and the critical studies for your information. Again, thank you so much and enjoy this particular really fascinating topic of exploring eco-narrations and narratives of hope. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Son. Was the same as Dr. Wan, very insightful. We have learned so much, especially since environmental humanities is an interdisciplinary field, which I think that's one of the, or I hope it has helped students to understand that you can tackle environmental sustainability from many different fields, which are not, which need to be also interconnected, right? To actually provide an effective approach and an effective solution to our environmental crisis, which is not just such a crisis of climate, it's a crisis of values, which are reflected in our environments. And I think in that sense is where you can also link humanities and sciences, right? And so in that sense, it's been so grateful really to give us this brief introduction about main literary works. Also, thank you for providing a summary of the three main waves, so-called waves within environmental humanities. And as you can see, it's such a rich and complex field, right? I don't know if you know that your PowerPoint is going a little bit crazy.
Really?
I don't know if you're aware.
I cannot see it.
But it just seems like it's alive. It tries to say something to us, and I don't know what it's trying to say. Maybe you can decipher that. No, but really, it's it is so necessary, right? And as I was saying, I hope as students understand the environmental humanities within the field that you are analyzing, which is literary, and I also work in that field. It is such a rich, and complex, and so many different ways of research and lines of research that I hope you can understand that it's parallel to science, right? Science is going very complex in terms of understanding sustainability, but also humanities. And that was also one of the reasons why I wanted to provide this bridge between disciplines. And in order to tackle an environmental humanities project, you need people from very diverse disciplines on your team, right? So also, if you are thinking about future projects along these lines, you need connections also with humanities, not just only sciences. So, well, students, comments, questions for Dr. Song? No one? No one? It's...
Good evening. I was gonna say something. Yeah, I was gonna say something, and my question is that do you think that the way we're causing damage to nature and to the planet is affecting this kind of movement called phytography and the nature novels?
Yeah, this is a great question. So as Shayana mentioned that, so this is a kind of multi, kind of efforts from different parties, from different companies, different disciplines. So we can see that Walden, the classical work regarding the lives in the woods. So that's in American literature. And Xiaojue talk about, pre-modern Chinese literature, I guess in Spanish literature. And then we can even revisit the Cervantes, Don Quixote, some kind of tree writings. It lasts everywhere, it lasts 1,000 of years. But then my point is that this kind of eco-critical and environmental consciousness is a belated awakening. So we see the human conquers, human efforts to damage the nature. to cutting trees, right, for their particular modernist project or the modernization. So in China, we must say, so this kind of the tree stories, right, not only about the beauty of the nature in the past, but also the usefulness of the nature for human concerns, but then they damage the environment. So in China, I guess it's starting from 1980s, 1990, even later. Think about the smog, the smog story, excuse me, the air pollutions. So that's kind of belated consciousness in contemporary Chinese literature, film, and also culture in the society. So as I mentioned that we need to consider and reconsider the relationship between the human and nature, the environment, right? We also rely on the efforts from scholars, artists, from the non-government organizations, and also the government support, right, to protect the environment, to protect the trees, waters, airs, and others. And this way, we can hope a hopeful future in the years to come. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. I think it was also important, this connection that we saw with you and also with Dr. Wan, how Asian, in particular Chinese poets, writers, they find inspiration in European poets and writers. You just mentioned Thoreau, Henry David Thoreau. I mentioned before that the connection with the Transcendentalist movement, which he's one of the main voices of the Transcendentalist movement, is a movement that started in the United States by the end of the 19th century. And it's a reaction to the industrialization. So, and also Dr. Wan was making this connection with Goethe, right? Which is also a very famous. So I think it's also important to see these connections, that sometimes it seems like also because of the language barrier, right, that it seemed that they would not have connections, but they have a lot. I just have one very brief question. When you mentioned realism, I think it was a term. Is it a line of research, or was it in connection to the novel? Because I didn't myth realism. You mean that it's a particular line of research?
That's a great question. So Yan Lianke is one of the major writers from China. We know Mo Yan won the Nobel Prize. I guess Yan Lianke, if he would win the prize, was not a surprise as well. So he's a very productive writer, and he garnered some major prize, including, I mentioned that, Franz Kafka Prize, the absurdity of reality. China now, sometimes you can see that the development is really way too fast. That's why here they would say, so reality is more crazy than the fiction. So that's the reality. And then that's why here he would coin this term, the mytho-realism. So is realism still along that genealogy of realist tradition? It's very, very long, right? In the Western world, Balzac, Charles Dickens, the list can continue. And in modern China, in the beginning of 20th century, we still within this realism is the most, important literary trend schools in China. And now in the in the end of 20th century, in the beginning of 21st century, Yan Lianke still he tried to follow this tradition, but he wants to be a rebel son. That means he's a son. He wants to still honor this tradition, right? We can see focus on the realities, even though it's crazier than the fictional, this kind of imaginary representation. On the other hand, he tried to rely on different types of myths, legends, imaginations, metaphors. So you can see, so our story is not logical, but still the true reality is illogical. That's why here, maybe this kind of new term, by combining myth and also realism together to maybe write a world in terms of, you can see the essay, short story, novella, and novels, they can see a reality maybe more real, than the fiction, than the true reality. So it is an imaginary work, but it can tell, the true symptoms, problems of contemporary China. That's why I guess for Yan Lianke, so this is his way to discover the power of literary narrative, the power of fiction writing, and also we can see maybe to develop a kind of narrative of hope and also reflection of China, not only for Chinese people, but for the entire world literature. So this is a new term. That's why this year is published a small book by Duke University Press. It's called The Discovery of Fiction. And there we can see some kind of relatively detailed description. I don't use the term definition, a kind of depiction of mytho-realism, his understanding of literature, reality, and his methods of narrative and imagination.
Thank you so much. And I think it would be a great note to end today's session, praising also the work of environmental humanities to promote narratives of hope. Well, this symbolism and this symbiotic, harmonious connection between the human and non-human world. I hope you can leave today's session with the assertion that also from the humanities, we're working through this. I don't know if you have any more last minute thoughts. I also would like to take a picture, if it's okay, even though the screen is a little bit crazy because I can see like a double screen from your, but doesn't matter.
Oh, sorry. I think,
okay.
oh, okay. Should I just turn it off? Let me see.
Yeah, close the PowerPoint, please.
I close the, yeah, just now can you?
And so now, no, I still see myself double and some of us double, but doesn't matter.
I think the problem comes as you are still sharing your screen.
Exactly. Thank you, Rodrigo. So you have to stop sharing. If you can go to the icon of stop sharing.
Okay, let me try one more time.
Okay.
Share.
I'm
it's
also,
good now?
Yes, perfect.
Okay,
wow,
yeah.
That is great. Okay. I guess Shia is not going to turn the camera now. I don't know, Omar, can you turn the camera now, please? No, Omar is not there. Okay, so at the count of 3, 1, 2, 3. All right, one more just in case. Sometimes somebody is with their eyes closed. Okay, 1, 2. Yes, we have Omar. Okay, so just waiting for you. 1, 2. Perfect. All right, so I'm just going to stop also recording.